It's time for a Drummer Nation. Hi, Mike. Welcome to Drummer Nation. Thanks for doing my show.
Oh, man. Michael, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Same here. I'm thinking the first time we met, I wonder if you remember, was at a Chicago drum show years ago. We're in a restaurant, and you were there with Johnny Rabb, and Stanton Moore was there with me and Ron Dinette.
Yeah, I remember that night.
Wasn't
I
it
talk
fun?
about that night to my clinics and with my students. It was so cool. I don't know if you remember because I think you're older than me, aren't you? Anyway,
Maybe.
if we sat around and we talked about music, and like, when's the last time you did that? How cool was
Well,
that?
I just have to stop there and think of the company I was with, between you and Ron and Stanton and Johnny. Need I say more, What a great
You,
start.
there's enough there to keep a psychologist going for a while, at least.
At least five crazy people,
At
but some
least,
heavily talented SOBs, you know what I mean? Uh,
yeah.
um,
It
now, give me a little background on you. You're from Oregon?
No, actually, don't tell anybody in Oregon, but I'm not from Oregon. I tell people in Oregon I'm from Alaska. I was actually born in Alaska, Army brat, and
Hmm.
raised in Monterey, California, which
Oh,
kind of
okay.
sucked.
And
Yeah.
let's get through the school years early. You went to what, USC?
First, University of Oregon, studied with Charles Dowd for a legit percussion performance degree back in the early 80s. And then went on to get my master's at USC and studied with Kenny Watson, when first called Tempest guy there in the TV and film industry, and
Hmm.
Dale Anderson, one of the most ridiculous mallet players, ever to live. It was
So you
great.
play mallets as well?
I do.
Good for you.
Back when I was in school, there were no jazz degrees. In fact, it wasn't until some, 8, 9 years later that USC started to get a contemporary music degree and whatnot. But I had to go with a legit percussion path.
Well, coming out of a great school like that, you moved into the studio scene, didn't you?
Yeah, I had a pretty clear plan. I realized that there were only like, 1.5 million great drummers out there, always willing to do gigs, and maybe even better than I was, right? I needed an ace in the hole. And mine was that I could play kit, and I could turn around and play mallets and temps and do all that stuff, and really do electronics. And that's what got me into
We're going
the
to get into
studio.
electronics in a minute, but tell our viewers some of the TV and movies you were associated with.
Oh boy. Some of the movies, well, it was a lot of the Mel Brooks stuff. First big movie was Spaceballs. It
Love
was
it.
great because I remember walking in and first day, and I think first day Harvey Mason was on the gig on playing mallets. Joe Picaro, Larry Bunker. Larry Bunker, right? I don't know. A lot of people don't know, but he was the cat that played on the original Mission Impossible. The shum da 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 shadum shadum da 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 da
Studio
da da.
legend.
I mean, that was the cat that made me want to play drums and do TV and film music. And he was there, and I was working with him. It was
So you must
wild.
have held your own. Some of the other TV shows, or addition?
Let's see, Home Improvement,
I thought
the Tim
so.
Allen Show, Roseanne, uh, Carol and Company, the last incarnation of Carol Burnett's thing. Funny story about that one,
Please.
well, because it's Carol Burnett, but yeah, I wish I would have been there. She said one day, she said apparently to someone, "Hey, get Mike Snyder back here. We got to have Mike Snyder on set." It was just like, could you call my mom and tell her that?
Hey, you know the four stages in a studio musician's career?
No.
Who's Mike Snyder? That's first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get me Mike Snyder. That's second.
Hmm.
Third is get me a young Mike Snyder. And fourth is who's Mike Snyder?
Yeah, right.
It's just a joke. Your career has not
Yeah, yeah.
resembled that.
Not so much, actually.
So let's jump into the electronics because you're I mean you're a wonderful drummer, regular acoustic natural drums, but you really have a foothold and a reputation in the electronics aspects of all of that. How'd you get involved in that?
Well, going back to the studio thing, well, when I was in high school, my high school gig wasn't at a restaurant. It was working for a guy named Don Underwood who made the Underwood bass pickups, and so I was making these acoustic bass, piezo-based acoustic um, uh, bass pickups in my high school days. And that's where I kind of learned the piezo technology. And when I went to Los Angeles, I knew that I had to be different. I had to have an ace in the hole. There's a drummer, John Goldsmith. I don't know if you know John. John played with Rasha and Roland Kirk in the 70s and 80s. And he lived in Monterey. And when I went away to school, he goes, Mike, man, you're going away. And you got to remember, you're a commodity. You got to polish yourself all up and make sure you get on the shelf next to the Campbell soup and that they pick you and not the Campbells. It was like the best information ever.
Well,
And
it took me many years to get hip to the digital thing, not until like 10 years ago when I was in LA and that was all happening in the 80s. I sort of went the other way and just played bebop. But it all
yeah,
seemed so confusing back then. And to tell you the truth,
it was
MIDI is what technology from the early 80s that's changed very
1983.
little. And
1983
most
it
drummers
was.
are midiots to this day.
And it's even come back. It's gone full circle because with Pro Tools and whatnot these days, a lot of times you don't even commit to MIDI. You just deal with it in audio.
Right.
I'm dealing with MIDI today behind me, doing a big project for ATV for their sound store, and it was scratching my head a little bit at first, kind of going, okay, what's my workflow? Because I don't deal with MIDI that much
Right.
anymore.
Well, let's talk about how you got hooked up with Roland quite some time ago and did a lot of work for them, both in
Yeah,
design, clinics, sales, just information, authoring books
yeah.
on this stuff. Is that right?
That is, yeah. And what happens? I had met the product manager for Roland, Steve Fisher,
Hmm.
and I had met him in the early 90s. He did one of the first electronic drum videos, kind of 92 for Hal Leonard, I think. And I had brought some drum triggers over because I had a business that manufactured drum triggers starting in the late 80s.
Hmm.
And 5, 6 years later, he gives me a call because he heard I had sold my company and whatnot, and says, "Hey, we got these new electronic drums coming out. You want to come do clinics and whatnot?" And that turned into a 15-year kind of relationship with Roland up until 3, 4 years
Well, I
ago.
think the thing that made those things work is that you didn't have to understand them a lot to know how to play them. They kept getting more and more user friendly. The sounds were in the module, and you really didn't have to dig into MIDI settings, trigger settings, velocity curves, channel settings, all that language that scares the hell out of us.
Yeah, it was plug and play, and that's kind of the key. That's the key for I think anything in life. It can't be that difficult.
Yeah, we don't know how our cars work.
I don't
You
want to know
know,
how
who,
my
who
car
understands the
works.
internal combustion engine? You just get in and turn it on and drive it.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
now
You're supposed to take it to the mechanic though, occasionally.
the modules back then and still today are all pretty much self-contained, but there are also software instruments, right? What they call
Yes,
VSTs.
yeah, VSTs and plugins and
How
software
does that
instruments
differ
that.
from? I mean, I understand. Like I have a Zen drum, which has no sounds in it whatsoever, right? It's a
Right,
controller. In the same way that the pads with an electronic drum set don't have any sounds, they go into a module. The module has Roland's own proprietary sounds and methods of producing those sounds. Yamaha may have a
mm-hmm,
different version of it that doesn't play well together. Everybody's got their own version of that. And how does that
right.
differ, that modeling, from what would be a VST plugin?
Well, I think there's two things. I think first, the software libraries were first designed not for drummers. They were designed for keyboard players and production engineers
Right.
to replace drums or create drum parts without a drummer, or fixing crappy drum sounds, which, oh yeah, that never happens in the studio. And so they weren't really meant to be played by a drummer, and I think that's where modules and drummer centric modules like from Roland and Yamaha and ATV and Alesis and now, soon from Pearl, where those are meant to be played, right? And it's a whole different process and sound creation and sound design to make them playable. And I think that's one of the big differences with the software. And the software is still a bit of a throwback to the early days of electronic drums, where you got to know a little bit sometimes to get it working.
I've been involved in software. In fact, I had a library out there that won a Drummy I'm proud of. And we did some things with Stanton Moore and with Peter Erskine. And, for as simple as you guys in the know present it as, there's a learning curve to that stuff.
Yeah, there is, especially when it's software. Software stuff, still, you got to know. Mm-hmm. You got to know. And I, personally, I don't want to bring a $3,000 laptop on a gig. That's still not my thing. And so I want to still see it be in the module, yet be really playable and sound like freaking drums.
No, I love my Zen drum. And just the other day, I was asking a friend, how can I play this without having to bring a computer and an external hard drive and a MIDI interface and my pedals? And you really can't. You have to bring all that stuff. But the sounds are pretty amazing once you can do that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of work up here. I live in Portland, Oregon now, and I do a lot of work for Oregon Catholic Press. They have an SSL room here, and if I have a mallet call for like marimba or xylophone or orchestra bells, I don't bring orchestra bells. I don't bring an actual marimba anymore. Right. I bring my mallet controller, my cat mallet controller, and bring Mainstage in Logic. Just so I bring my.
I think drummers need to realize that that's mainstream now, and that those sounds are indistinguishable from the real instruments in recording settings.
Well, especially mallet instruments. You think about marimbas, right? You go get it tuned every 5 or 10 years or more, and it's almost immediately it's out of tune.
People don't realize that either. That even vibraphones made out of metal go out of tune.
Right. And many of them are tuned not to A440. They're tuned up to 442 for that extra byte. And then you get somebody that has a tuning that's lower than that, like you go to Europe and it's 538 or lower now. For some orchestras, you're kind of hosed, and you're not with electronics.
Not to mention how much space it takes in a pit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you have a preference? Would you rather do a date on real drums or electronics? Because the bugaboo with the real drums is to get those giant sounds takes a lot of mics and a lot of outboard gear and a lot of space, a big room.
And I think you kind of led the answer to that question there. Is that I look at all these instruments, like behind me, there's an electronic kit, and it's like sitting down here, I've got my woofer drum from DW, right? So I mean, it's like, what do I need for the gig? Mm-hmm. What's the tool I need? Just like a carpenter, man. He uses a tack hammer for small jobs. He uses a ball peen hammer for certain things. He uses a framing hammer for certain things. So you pick and choose what instrument. And
the electronics
that's what I do.
May very well be the right instrument for that right gig.
Absolutely. If I'm walking into a studio to play an unplugged acoustic drum style date, and the studio has great mic pre's and great mics and a nice sounding room and a good engineer, I'm going to play acoustic drums. That's just what it is.
Lot, but it's not always there.
Yeah. And no, it's not. You go to a production studio and it's a bad room, and they have 3 SM58s. One of them looks like they actually framed the room with it,
which has been done with an SM58.
Not to get a good drum. Never a good thing.
I understand the importance of that now, and I've embraced it as well. Tell me about some of your. You have an E-stick, right?
I do.
That would be an electronic drumming stick.
It's a stick that's kind of designed, and actually, I didn't know you were going to ask about it. I'm in my studio, so I have a pair here. And
so how would that differ than a regular stick for your acoustic drums?
Well, the only thing that's really different, it was I was playing with at the time with 5A extremes. I'm a Vic
Hmm.
guy, and I love the length, but they had a lot of shoulder taper. I mean, not enough shoulder taper, so they're kind of heavy at the end, a little too heavy for me. And sometimes I just felt that I didn't need that. So for electronics, I thinned down the shoulder so I didn't have as much weight. And then I took there's this law of acoustics that the larger the surface area you excite a membrane with. So the larger the stick you hit the drum with, the more fundamental pitch you
Hmm.
get. And so I designed a tip that was based off my SD1 Generals from the late 70s, which I still
Hmm.
have, and they turned into a really great shape that puts a ton of surface area on the head and theoretically would give you a more, well, a cleaner trigger spike because it'll have less high frequency content in it.
You have a
Yeah.
book out on,
So that's
on
the idea.
electronic drumming, don't you? Don't you
I'm
have a book
sorry?
out on electronic drumming?
I do. 2006, I had one come out on Hal Leonard called All About Electronic Percussion.
But it's still pretty
I
relevant.
think it
I've,
was in
I've looked through that book. It doesn't feel dated at all.
No, I got the rights back to it about 5 years ago because they took it out of print and for whatever reason, because electronic percussion's not growing.
It's not?
Anyway, no, I'm just a joke.
Okay.
It's it's
I
cynicism,
got you.
Mike. For the love
How
of
could I have
God,
missed
stay with
that?
me.
One cynic to another.
No, no, and I'm planning to put it out
Good.
again here
Now,
pretty soon. Yeah, there's never a place where you could go and get all the bonehead questions you
right,
want to ask, but you would be embarrassed to
right.
ask. There's just no place to go. So this is basically a repository of all the answers to all the
Well, it's helped
dumb
me. I highly
questions.
recommend it.
Uh,
We'll put a screen capture or something up of it. Now, we're pressed for time, so let me steer this to the end. But if a drummer sits down to play an electronic kit, he or she's better off adjusting. You adjust your playing to the kit, don't you think?
well, I
Otherwise, you're
think
messing
in
with
a
all kinds
perfect
of
world you
triggers
wouldn't
and
have
settings and
you.
crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten better and better to where you don't have to adjust as much. When Simmons drums came out, which was my first kit in
Hmm.
1984, you basically had to dumb yourself down like there's no
Right,
tomorrow, right? Because it wouldn't respond, it didn't
right.
track well, sounded kind of cool. As we kind of moved along and the V drums came out in the late 90s, you really didn't have to change that much. And now I'm involved with this new company that was started by the founder of Roland called ATV. And they have a module out called the AD5 that actually feels and sounds like acoustic drums. It's kind of
Hmm.
freaky to play because I have to hold back and not hit as hard as I used to. I finding out that I had to overplay drums in the past, electronic drums. Now I don't. I play them like my
That's one thing I
acoustics
learned.
because they
They're
have
easy to
great
overplay. You just need to relax and let the instrument work for you.
relax and trust
Hmm.
that middle
Hmm.
range, of velocity or volume is going to speak. And this is the first module that ever has. And so I've had to actually relearn playing electronics and approach it now like acoustic
Well, we
drums.
just scratched the surface, but this is a short format medium, and I'd like to thank you.
Well, then you got the
I
wrong
want to
guy.
thank you for coming on and ask you to be a guest again, and we'll get more in depth on these things. Will you do that for me?
Absolutely, Mike. Anytime. I love talking about it. A lot of stuff was passed on to me when I
Hmm.
was young by other players, and I need to
Now
pay
that
it
we're getting
forward.
older, we all need to
Yeah,
do that, and that's part of what Drummer Nation is all about
yeah.
too. All right, well, I'll see you at NAMM. I presume I will, right?
Yes, you
Showing you new
will.
stuff. All right.
Show new stuff. Got some exciting stuff I can't talk
You could
about,
tell me, but you'd have to kill
but
me, right?
I'd
Yeah.
have to
Yeah, I
kill
don't want that to happen.
somebody.
All right, man. Thanks for doing the
No.
show, and I'll catch up with you at NAMM, brother. The This is your host, Michael Vosbine, and I want to thank our friends at Atlanta Pro Percussion, Danette Classic Drums, Sabian Cymbals, and Classic Drummer Magazine. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.